What if she had chosen silence over command? What if she had simply accepted the role that history assigned her? If she had, the kingdoms of Spain would have shattered, collapsing under the weight of weak kings and endless, brutal warfare. But when crowns failed, one woman took control. She didn't do it from behind the throne, whispering advice into a king's ear. No, she stepped into the very center of power itself. Her name was Urraca Fernández, a queen who didn't just influence kings, she controlled them. This is the story they tried so hard to bury. Urraca was born into a world where Spain was not one nation, but a chaotic mosaic of fragile kingdoms, constantly at war with each other and with outside invaders. Alliances were like sand, shifting with the tide of every battle. Loyalty was a commodity, something to be bought, sold, and inevitably, betrayed. From a very young age, Urraca learned a dangerous and powerful lesson. True power doesn't belong to kings. It belongs to those who understand both the battlefield and the treacherous corridors of the court. She was a silent observer, a sponge for information. She watched generals argue over strategy, their egos clashing as much as their swords. She listened intently as nobles schemed in shadowy corners, their whispers filled with ambition and envy. She memorized everything. She knew who wanted land, who craved titles, and who, most importantly, wanted blood. While everyone else saw only chaos and destruction, Urraca saw the patterns. She saw opportunity. Like most royal women of her time, she was married off for politics, not for love. She was a pawn in a larger game, a treaty sealed with a wedding vow. She was expected to be a dutiful wife, to produce heirs, and to disappear into the background, a silent, beautiful ornament. But Urraca did neither. She refused to be invisible. Instead, she made herself indispensable. When armies marched, it was Urraca who advised on the best routes, her knowledge of the terrain often surpassing that of seasoned commanders. When sieges stalled and morale plummeted, it was Urraca who proposed clever, unconventional solutions. When tense negotiations failed and diplomacy crumbled, it was Urraca who demanded decisive action, cutting through the posturing and indecision. Before long, a subtle but revolutionary shift occurred. Commanders and nobles stopped going to the kings for permission. They started asking her. Then, the inevitable happened. Civil war erupted, tearing across the Spanish lands like a wildfire. Cities burned to the ground. Kings lost control of their own armies. Entire legions defected, switching sides for a better promise of gold or power. This was the moment when most queens, most people in fact, would have fled for safety, seeking refuge in a distant convent or a fortified castle. But Urraca wasn't like most queens. She advanced. She didn't just send her support from afar. She rode with the troops. This wasn't a symbolic gesture for propaganda. It was strategic. She was on the front lines, directing the flow of battle. She personally positioned forces, secured critical supply lines to feed her soldiers, and swiftly punished any sign of desertion, making it clear that her army was built on discipline, not empty promises. Soldiers followed her, not because of her royal title, but because she delivered what mattered most: victory. Her mere presence on the battlefield was enough to stabilize a collapsing front and rally wavering troops. And the kings, the men who wore the crowns, they began to fear her. They feared her because she was succeeding where they were so spectacularly failing. She was doing the one thing they couldn't. She was leading. She negotiated treaties herself, staring down rival rulers and forcing them into submission through sheer force of will and intellect. She controlled successions, becoming the ultimate kingmaker who decided who would rule and who would be cast aside. The men with crowns on their heads learned a harsh, humiliating truth. Without Urraca's support, without her mind and her army, they were nothing. Of course, her enemies couldn't attack her success, so they attacked her character. They accused her of being ruthlessly ambitious, a master manipulator, even a scandalous woman who used feminine wiles to get her way. But these accusations were just a mask for their real emotion: fear. They feared a woman who understood the mechanics of power far too well to ever surrender it. They feared a ruler who didn't need a crown to command absolute obedience. Urraca survived one betrayal after another. Plots were constantly forming within her own court, hatched by the very people who smiled to her face. Assassination attempts became a regular threat. Alliances she had painstakingly built would collapse overnight, built on the false promises of weak men. Yet, she outlasted them all. She didn't do it with brute force alone. She did it by never, ever misjudging her enemies, by always being 3 steps ahead in a deadly game of chess. When her long and turbulent era finally came to an end, the map of Spain was scarred and still divided, but it was standing. The kingdoms had survived. Why? Because when the kings faltered, when the entire structure of power threatened to crumble into dust, Urraca stepped in. She commanded the armies. She controlled the rulers. She stabilized the kingdoms. And what was her reward? History tried to erase her. It tried to reduce her legacy to gossip and scandal, to paint her as a cautionary tale of an overly ambitious woman, because admitting the real truth was far too dangerous, far too revolutionary for the time. The truth was that a woman had ruled Spain when the men in charge could not. Queen Urraca Fernández didn't rule from the throne. She ruled from reality, and that, without question, made her the most powerful queen of her time. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more hidden figures from history brought into the light, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And let me know in the comments which topic or forgotten queen you want me to cover next. Your support is what helps bring these incredible stories back to life. Thanks for watching.